The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the universe to know itself. Carl Sagan.
Welcome to the Lessons from Nature podcast, modeling the secrets of the bees. Hosted by Mark Rubin.
If you hear my voice, you're alive. And if you're alive, your body and mind are traveling at a speed of 19 miles per second around a star. And from the time I started talking to now, you already traveled about 200 miles. It's nice traveling through space and time with you. As Queen Claudine says in Honey is Money, time is always coursing and light is streaming too. We all exist in nature, but we're all just passing through. Today on the Lessons from Nature podcast, we'll be discussing Secret 22 from Honey is Money, and it's called We're All Just Passing Through. And it's about the idea that this isn't our planet, it's just our turn. I'd like to introduce my co-host, David Houle. He's a catalyst for creating a better tomorrow. David is a futurist, a thinker, a keynote speaker, and a cool person. He has keynoted numerous conferences around the country and internationally. In the last 14 years, he's delivered over 1,200 presentations and keynotes on 6 continents and 16 countries. He's written 14 books and is a co-founder of a global nonprofit to face the climate crisis. It's called This Spaceship Earth and can be found at thisspaceshipearth.org. David will co-host 4 episodes with me, and we're going to be talking about the future. And we're going to be talking about futurology through the lens of the human business of making money, learning skills, curating communities, creating habitat, and developing regenerative business systems that enable all of us to thrive. Welcome, David. It's great to have you here on the Futurology series.
I'm happy to be back. I'm really enjoying our conversation, Mark.
Thank you. Me too. So today we're talking about the fact that we're alive on a rock in space. And before we were alive on this rock in space, we were unalive. And after we're alive, we'll be unalive again. And some numbers for me in my life is that if the universe is 13.7 billion years old, I've only been alive for 0.0000039% of the time. And in that time, I've traveled over 30 billion miles on a spaceship called Earth. And I'm just passing through. And this project is based on 3 philosophies of Carl Sagan, philosophies of Buckminster Fuller, and some Native American philosophies that I learned from someone named Tom Brown Jr. What I learned from Tom Brown Jr. is the impermanence of life and considering multi-generational planning, about planning for future generations and their thriving and their survival. What this series is about is exploring and understanding the importance of respecting nature's balance and the cycles of nature and creating sustainable future based on multi-generational planning. And that's really what we're talking about today, because things change and being adaptable to those changes is critical for thriving. So I wanted to tell you a story from nature, from the bees, from the secrets of the bees, and explain this story to you to kick things off, to give you some perspective of my perspective of this chapter in Honey's Money, just passing through. And it's about the lifespans of bees and the differences in the lifespan between the bees. So imagine with me, you're a queen bee and you live the human equivalent of 1,500 years. You can never leave your house. And the only way you get money is if your daughters do work to gather money from your habitat. Your daughters can only go 3 miles from your house to gather this money. And the energy in the form of money is only available 60 days per year to go gather this energy from the habitat to bring you this money so that you can trade it for things to keep you alive. And your main job is simply to control the rate of egg production so that you have the maximum number of daughters available when the maximum amount of energy is available. And then throttle down your rate of egg production so that as they end their lifespan, there's no wasted energy. It's basically timing, okay, both the rate of That takes 21 days from a time that you lay a fertilized egg to have a bee, and then some more days after that before they could become productive foragers. So there's a timing component here of a curve. And you're a queen bee, and you're sensing the habitat around you, the money around you, based on light, based on temperature, based on humidity, and other variables, I'm sure. You're fighting through a competitive landscape because there's other queen bees who want that delicious money all around you. There are seasonal variations where a 1 or 2 week extension in a winter could have you burn through your cash reserves, the money in the bank or the honey in the honey bank. The last one is work, which is that the efficiency of the hive is based on a lot of internal variables that are managed and optimized across the hive through various functions and roles. And so you're the queen bee. You can't leave your house. Here's the scenario. And the only way you live is if there are 20 generations of daughters feeding you. By the way, there are some males that you produce, about 10% of the hive, but all they do is consume money. And there's a 1 in 1,000 chance that they will reproduce and spread your DNA into the future. Okay, so that's their entire job. They just eat money, and then maybe there's a chance that your DNA will propel into future generations. This is the game of a queen bee. Now, so that's the scenario of the setup of a difference between human short-term thinking and bee long-term thinking. And it's because the lifespan of the organism in a hive, that is the organism that is controlling the main variable, which is the rate of energy collection in response to the cost of energy collection, that organism lives multiple generations, 20 generations. So the idea of making short-term decisions does not work because that organism is dependent on 20 future generations to survive. And I want to discuss for a few minutes about decision-making and planning in human behavior, and how, given the life cycles of both a human lifespan, but also our political life cycles of terms, and how we think about time and how we think about our place in time and what came before, and in your case, what comes next, how we could learn from the secrets of the bees to change the mindset of people for longer term planning.
Well, the problem with humanity, it's short term, as you've implied, and we seem to think that it's all about us. So to put things in perspective, you like to use traveling around the sun. I like to bring it home more to the planet. If you took a rope that was 24 feet long and put it up on the stage where I often speak, that's the amount of time that Earth has been in existence. Then you add a penny to the end of the rope, and that's the amount of time that humanity has been on Earth. We've been around for 300,000 years, Homo sapiens, modern humanity about 150,000. So if you put that in perspective, say a lifetime is 50 years, we live longer than that now. Centuries ago, we lived to 20, 25, 30, maybe. So if the average lifetime is 50 years, 150,000 years is 300 lifetimes. If you go back to the beginning of the agricultural age, when humanity first started to develop a sense of place by growing crops, that's 10,000, right? So that's 20,000, that's 200 lifetimes.
Yeah.
The industrial age, 250 years, 5 lifetimes.
Mm.
So all of the stuff that we live in now that humans think of as what is real, driving cars, getting on planes, things like that, has only been around for 5 lifetimes. Humanity has a great sense of thinking that now is what reality is. And the problem with that, of course, is that the planet has been around for a lot longer than we have. The average mammalian species lives for 1 million years. Deer and field mice or their ancestors have been around longer than we have, but we think it's all about us. And so what's so beautiful about the bee metaphor is the collaborative nature of immediacy to prepare for the long term.
Exactly.
Right? We don't prepare for the long term.
Right.
The reason we have the climate crisis today is because we consume too much, burn too much fossil fuels, and think that every other species is there for us. Now, the bees are there for us, but we haven't treated them as though they are. So the bees are a good analogy to represent the long-term future of the biosphere and the short-term nature through which humanity looks at it. Does that make sense?
100%. I completely agree. It reminds me of something Buckminster Fuller said. Most people are localized in their thinking,
Right.
which is that they only think about what's immediately in their habitat, like in their perspective. The people, the politics, the food, the culture, the sports teams, whatever it is that's near them. But there's also an idea of being localized in time, meaning that they only think of what they've experienced in their lifespan, or maybe one generation ago, or maybe two. And so when you're a futurist, you're also studying large cycles of the past. I mean, you're a timist, really. You're looking at all time, but then you're projecting the ideas into the future because that's where we're going. And I think that gives you a very good view of events, long-term events, and things that have occurred over cycles of millions of years versus people that, are waiting for the weekend. And so it's interesting that we're so localized, like as a species, in our thinking.
Well, that's starting to change. The first book I wrote called The Shift Age. And I said that it's the beginning of the global stage of human evolution, right? So if you think of the concept of place, up until communications technology, place was all we had. We didn't know anything else that was going on. The Roman Empire, the Mayan Empire, and some of the great dynasties of China, they all existed simultaneously. But they didn't know it because they were stuck in their placeness.
Right.
Now, if you were to put that into the modern day, we find out something's happening in China within minutes. Communication goes by the speed of light through fiber optics. So we're moving from the concept of place to the concept of space at this point, because we're moving towards the global stage of human evolution. So the point I'm making is that you're absolutely right. We have been stuck historically in place, but only now are we moving to a spatial connectivity. This is why it's such a good time to do this project that you've invested your life in, because we're moving to a spatial connectivity. And that changes everything in terms of human perception of time and place, obviously.
Thanks for saying that. And I want to add that back to the Native American philosophies that I studied with Tom Brown Jr., I agree with you completely about our location. But what I think is lacking in my experience is time. What I learned from Tom Brown Jr. was the idea of planning for 7 generations ahead. Right. 7 generations. They would never divert a river or something without thinking what's going to happen in 7 generations. It's one thing to be connected in space to people because information can be conveyed in real time, but it's the time component, the future time component, that we're heading on a trajectory. There's a timeline, whatever it is, and we're moving. Basically, what world do we want to intercept? What world do we want our children to intercept, or our grandchildren, great-grandchildren? What is the world we want them to intercept on the trajectory that we're on? And I just feel this is a philosophical discussion today about what could be done to improve people's perception of that we're meeting the future. The future is always coming, and soon tomorrow will be today. Next winter, let's create the honey in the most harmonious way. Anyway, from Honey is Money. But what could be done? It's always coming.
Well, that's hard to get people to think the way I do. I'm not accurate in terms of this is going to happen on this day.
Yeah.
I'm accurate in the sense of directional trends. Where we are right today, which is what the thing I'm trying to get people to focus on facing forward, is most humans think maybe in 4 generations, but usually 3. I have parents, I have kids. My kids, my parents or grandparents of my kids. They don't think in terms of 7 generations the way the Native Americans do. But we need to think beyond that.
Yeah.
Oversimplified, there's 2 trajectories that humanity has to choose in the next 5 to 10 years. We have to choose whether we're going to be around for 200 years or around for 200,000 years. And 200 years is we keep doing what we're doing. Instead, if we want to get to 100,000 years, we have to think of the unborn as many generations. 7 isn't even enough. 20 generations is 1,000 years. And if we want to live to 100,000 years, we can't think that far ahead. I can't think that far ahead. No futurists can think that far ahead. Only science fiction people, authors can think that far ahead. But the reality is, you're absolutely right. Those people alive today on the planet are obligated to bring the unborn future generations to the table of the decision making,
Yes.
similar to the Indians in altering the path of a river. So we're at this moment. So, I mean, my mission in life is to get people to wake up, to realize, classic rock phrase I use is, we're on the highway to hell and we need to get on the stairway to heaven.
Ah, nicely done. Okay.
Well, it's true.
I think that we can do it. I think it's doable. Yeah.
So that's why I really like your project, because instilling this vision of the planet and the planet's future and our integration into it needs to start with the young. So the children's book is the right way to start.
Thanks.
Well, I mean, it's true. That's why you're interviewing me, because I'm supporting it.
I appreciate your support and also understanding. While it's not possible to predict thousands of years out with a degree of accuracy, there's one thing we can predict. If we subtract more than we add, we'll run out of energy. But if we develop regenerative systems that add more than they subtract, we'll have more later, and that'll buy time, because money's traded for time. So basically, our energies are traded for time, but we use money to tokenize that energy. But the point is, if we take more out than it comes in, we'll run out.
Well, we've been doing that since 1970. Right now, we're consuming 1.7 Earths every year, meaning we're 70% over the ability of the Earth to regenerate what we're extracting from it. And that's what the climate crisis is. It's the beeping red button going off, wah, 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 plan has to be terminated, extinction coming. That's where we are.
Yes, but it's not where we have to be. Let's talk about changes in the demographics of human population, both in terms of a growing population and the resources required to sustain that population, but also the idea of a shrinking population and an aging population across the world, as the number of babies being born is going down in many countries. And so populations will start shrinking, as they've done in Japan and other countries.
I am fully of the school that declining birth rates are good, and that our species has a little over 8 billion members of our species on the planet, and that we need to manage population so that we get down to about half of that by 2100. Every new being is a new carbon footprint. Mm-hmm. And until we get off of carbon, having more passive passengers on spaceship Earth, it's counterproductive, right? And if you start to think about it, the only reason that all these stories about the aging population in Japan and Italy and what's going to happen to Social Security is all based on a 20th century industrial age model that growing the population means growing the GDP. Mm-hmm. And the GDP is the absolute wrong barometer if you want to start thinking about climate and life. We need to rethink our thinking about population growth. In other words, population is aging. What does every single culture that you've ever read about or participated in, the old or the wise? So we're proportionately getting more wise as a species because the older demographics are increasing. So we have more wisdom, right? So let's use that wisdom to keep shrinking the population. Tell me everybody is being fed. No, 800 million people go to sleep every night hungry. Tell me that there's no homeless because everybody has a home, right? So there's too many people. We're not up to dealing with the people we have. So we need to shrink the population. I mean, I'm firmly believer that. I know that's a little bit off message here.
Not at all. No, there's no message. It's your message.
Well, but the point is that one of the reasons you've gotten into bees, aside from honey is money and the energy around that, massive amounts of bees have been killed for one reason only: how humanity lives on the planet. So thinking of an entire species that we need to pollinate our crops, bees, is brilliant because we have to start to think about partnerships with other species, not that they're there for our indulgence and pleasure.
Yeah, I think symbiotic relationships, if you think of the relationship between the bee and the flower,
Right.
and that the bee is rewarded with energy for moving the flower's genetic information around, a symbiotic relationship. And the result of that is that the flowers can expand across vast territories that they couldn't, because they're not mobile. They don't have feet. There's no flowers with feet. Or maybe the seeds, I guess, is a way. Seeds that float, I suppose, is a way of doing that. But thinking through, like just replicating these same, what you just said was really beautiful, is replicating the symbiotic connections with nature, because we are nature. Humans are nature. We're not separate from nature. We're mammals. We're nature. But we don't act as if we're part of nature. And so the world I imagine is a world where people live in harmony with the rest of nature. And that's what this project is.
Native Americans don't think of their surrounding as something to consume.
Right.
They think of their surrounding as their ancestors.
Yeah.
In other words, the forest represents their ancestors. They hear and see spirits of the earth, of the plants, of the animal kingdom. So they have understood the integration and the necessity of being integrated with all living things. That's what's so beautiful about Native American thinking. I have a question for you. Earlier on in the podcast, you mentioned that a queen bee lives the equivalent of 1,500 years.
Yeah.
What's the correlation with a queen bee?
So a queen bee can live about 4 years.
4 years.
And a regular bee lives around 4 or 5 weeks. That's
it. Really? Okay.
Yeah. So when you do the proportionality,
it's an astounding number.
But if you think it through, she can't leave the house. She can only survive if her decisions result in 20 future generations. And so she's a caretaker for the future. And she's a caretaker for her genetic code to live for as long as possible. And if she's successful, like super successful, what'll happen is they'll have so much energy in the energy bank in the hive that they're out of room. And what they'll do is they'll swarm, which means half the bees stay behind. And the queen, the successful queen, the successful, strong, smart queen, she'll leave with half the bees and start over again. But what happens is the bees that remain clone her DNA and keep going. And because they have enough money in the money bank to ride out the 40 days it takes, I think, to 41 days to do it.
So another form of energy, as you've just said it, implied, is the bees who live 3 or 4 weeks are really supplying the queen bee with the energy for their subsequent generation.
Exactly. And that is the metaphor I was trying to get to. So thanks for clarifying it. That's exactly what I was trying to get to. So David, I know part of being a futurist, a big part, is thinking about technology and future technologies. And I'd like to discuss some ways in which technology can be used to promote sustainability and reduce environmental harm. And in particular, exploring the challenges associated with developing and adopting sustainable technologies and ways to overcome them.
When I wrote my book, The Shift Age, back in 2007, I said that there would be 2 realities in the shift age, the physical reality and the screen reality. And it wasn't until COVID that people fully understood that. And that's one statement. The other statement is every single year, there has been more carbon released into the atmosphere by humanity in the last 50 years, except for 1 year. That 1 year was 2020. And why did carbon pollution go down? Because for months at a time, several billion people did the same thing. They self-quarantined. And once you self-quarantine and you're on Zoom, as we are right now, you don't burn fossil fuels, right? So we stopped doing what we've been doing for several months. And it was the first time in history that several billion people did the same thing at the same time. As a consequence, carbon emissions went down. So therein is the single greatest example of how technology can help us. In other words, I know it sounds crazy, but if everybody self-quarantined at home for a month a year, and we could do it together, or we could do it, or I'm taking my month of no carbon emissions in December rather than June because of my whatever. So that's one thing. The other thing, of course, is technological innovations in the energy front, like space-based solar power, things like that.
There are people that believe that human beings don't affect the climate at all, and that the impact we can have is so low that why bother to change anything. And the story you just told is powerful in the sense that something occurred and human behavior did change. And the result of that change is carbon went down. So if humans can do something and reduce the amount of carbon, then that is evidence of a factual, then we can do something, because that's the example of the something. Yeah.
And any human, once you do something once,
yeah,
it's a possibility.
That's right. It's a possibility. You created a possibility with that story. Right. Okay. So one of the goals of biological organisms is to propel their genetic information into the future. When we consider the transient nature of life, it's important to consider that other living things will be alive after we're no longer alive. Understanding cycles from the past can help us make long-term decisions now that improve the chances of future survival for future generations. After all, we're all just passing through, and we all have the opportunity to clean up our crew quarters on Spaceship Earth, so we can leave the planet a little better than we found it. If you enjoyed this discussion about multi-generational planning and the future and how things are changing, please subscribe to this podcast, Lessons from Nature, Modeling the Secrets of the Bees. On the next episode, we'll be discussing ways to buy time for future generations. Visit projecthoneylake.life for more information about living in harmony with the rest of nature. See you next time.